You know, there's something I've been thinking about lately, and I bet it's crossed your mind too. You're sitting at the kitchen table, maybe sipping your morning coffee, when the phone rings. It's your daughter, your son, or maybe even a grandchild. They're struggling, car repairs, medical bills, a down payment for a house. And they ask, gently, hopefully, could you help? Just until things get back on track. Now, if you're like most folks our age, your first instinct is to say yes. After all, what are we here for, if not to support the people we love? But here's the thing, that simple yes can sometimes lead to more heartache than either of you ever bargained for. Today, let's talk about why that happens, and how to navigate these moments with both your heart and your peace of mind intact. Because here's what I've learned. Love doesn't have to mean sacrifice. And sometimes, the wisest thing you can do for your family is to say no. Let me tell you about my friend Betty. Betty's 72, a retired schoolteacher, and the kind of woman who'd give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. Last year, her son Mark asked to borrow $15,000 to start a landscaping business. "Mom," he said, "I'll pay you back in 6 months, I promise." Now, Betty had the savings. She'd worked hard, lived frugally, and that money was meant to cover her property taxes and a few little trips she'd been dreaming about. But how could she say no? This was her son, so she wrote the check, hugged him tight, and told him not to worry. Fast forward a year. Mark's business struggled, the money's gone, and now Betty's dipping into her emergency fund to cover the bills. But what hurts even more? The tension between them. Every conversation feels like walking on eggshells. Mark avoids her calls, and Betty's too proud and too heartbroken to ask when or if she'll ever see that money again. Sound familiar? Maybe not with $15,000, maybe not with a son, but that ache of wanting to help, only to feel like you've lost something you can't get back? That's what we're here to untangle today. Because here's the first rule I want you to remember. It's not a loan, it's a gift. If you can't afford to give the money freely, with no strings attached, then it's not a loan. It's a recipe for resentment. And resentment has a way of creeping into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. Now, I know what you're thinking, but family helps family. That's just what we do. And you're right, but helping doesn't have to mean risking your own stability. When we're younger, we're taught to put others first, to be the rock, the provider, the problem solver. But this chapter of life, it's different. Your role isn't to fix everything anymore. It's to love, to guide, and to protect the peace you've earned. Which brings me to rule 2. Your nest egg isn't just money, it's your freedom. Let's be honest, when you're over 60, every dollar in your savings account represents years of hard work, tough choices, and dreams you've deferred. That money isn't just for emergencies, it's for living, for the quiet mornings on the porch, the visits with grandkids, the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws your way. Think about Frank, a retired mechanic from Ohio. Frank loaned his granddaughter $8,000 for college tuition. Sure, she'd pay him back once she landed her first job. But when graduation came, she took an internship that barely covered her rent. Frank didn't want to pressure her. He wanted her to chase her dreams. So he stayed quiet. Meanwhile, he's eating canned soup for dinner to stretch his Social Security check. Now, Frank's granddaughter, she has decades ahead to earn, save, and rebuild. Frank doesn't. And that's the math we don't talk about enough. Your time horizon isn't the same as theirs. What's a temporary setback for them could be a permanent loss for you. Does that mean you shouldn't help? Of course not. But it does mean you get to decide how on your terms. Maybe it's a smaller amount, maybe it's non-monetary support, or maybe it's saying, let's figure this out together. Because here's the truth. You've already given your family so much. You don't owe them your future, and they wouldn't want that for you either. Now, I know this isn't easy. Saying no to someone you love can feel like closing a door. But what if it's actually opening a window? What if, by setting boundaries, you're teaching your kids and grandkids how to stand on their own 2 feet, just like you taught them to tie their shoes or drive a car? In the next part, we'll talk about the third rule. The one that's less about money and more about the weight we carry in our hearts. We'll unpack why no can be the most loving word in the world and how to say it in a way that strengthens, rather than strains, the bonds you cherish. So stay with me, because the best part of this conversation, it's not just about protecting your savings. It's about reclaiming the joy of being a grandparent without the hidden price tag. You know, there's a phrase we don't hear enough as we get older. Your heart is not a bottomless well. And isn't that the truth? After a lifetime of giving, of time, energy, love, and yes, money, it's easy to forget that you deserve to keep a little something in reserve, not just for emergencies, but for the quiet joy of knowing you're still in charge of your own story. Which brings us to rule 3, the one that might feel the hardest at first, but could end up being the most freeing. No is a complete sentence. Let me explain. A few months back, I got a letter from a viewer named Helen. Helen's 68, a widow living in Florida, and her grandson, Jake, had asked her to co-sign a loan for a new truck. Just a formality, Grandma. He'd said, "I've got a steady job now, it'll be fine." Now Helen adores Jake. She'd raised him after her daughter passed away, and the thought of letting him down, it kept her up for nights. But here's what Helen realized. Co-signing that loan wouldn't just risk her credit. It would tie her to years of anxiety, watching every payment deadline like a storm cloud on the horizon. So she took a deep breath and said, "Jake, I can't do that, but let's sit down and figure out another way." And guess what? Jake was furious at first, called her selfish, slammed the door. But 2 weeks later, he came back, sheepish, apologetic, and asked if she'd help him research used trucks instead. Today, he's driving a reliable old Ford he paid for himself, and Helen, she sleeps like a baby. Here's the thing we forget. Our no doesn't just protect us. It teaches them how to grow. When we bail our kids or grandkids out of every tight spot, we're robbing them of the chance to build resilience, to feel the pride of solving their own problems. And isn't that the greatest gift we could give? Now, I won't sugarcoat it. Saying no can feel like you're betraying everything you've ever stood for. After all, isn't being there for your family the whole point? But let's reframe that. Think about your grandchild learning to ride a bike. You didn't carry them down the street forever, did you? No. You held the seat steady for a while, then let go, even though you knew they might skin their knees. That's what this moment is. Love isn't about removing every obstacle. It's about believing they're strong enough to face them. Take my neighbor Ray. Ray's in his late 70s, a Korean War vet with the heart of gold. His daughter asked to borrow $10,000 to pay off credit card debt last year. Ray's pension is fixed, and that money was earmarked for his wife's physical therapy. But how do you say no to your own child? Ray told me he practiced the conversation in front of the mirror for days. Finally, he sat her down and said, "Honey, I can't give you the money, but I'll be right here to help you make a budget. Call the credit card company, whatever you need." Was it awkward? You bet. But 6 months later, his daughter had negotiated lower interest rates, picked up weekend shifts at the library, and paid off half the debt herself. And Ray, he's prouder of her than he's been in years. Sometimes, the best way to say "I love you" is to step back and say, "I know you can do this." Because here's the secret. Your faith in them is worth far more than any check you could write. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. But what if they can't do it alone? What if they're truly in over their heads? That's where the beauty of non-monetary support comes in. Maybe it's offering to babysit so they can pick up extra hours. Maybe it's sharing your wisdom, helping them comparison shop for car insurance, or teaching them how to cook budget-friendly meals. Or maybe it's just being the calm voice that says, "This is tough, but it's temporary. You'll get through it." Because here's the truth. Your value isn't tied to your bank account. You've spent decades accumulating something far more precious: experience, resilience, the quiet knowledge that storms don't last forever. That's the legacy your family needs most. Let's talk about guilt for a moment. That heavy, gnawing feeling that follows you to the grocery store, the doctor's office, even your morning walk. Should I have helped more? Am I letting them down? But here's a question worth asking. Who's looking out for you? When you pour from an empty cup, everyone loses. But when you protect your peace, when you honor the life you've built and the years you have left, you're modeling something powerful. You're showing your family how to age with dignity, how to set boundaries with love, and how to prioritize what truly matters. And isn't that the lesson we all hope to pass down? Remember, you are not a bank. You are a beacon, a lighthouse guiding them home, not by solving every wave, but by standing firm in your own light. In the next part, we'll tackle the question I hear most often. What if they stop loving me? We'll walk through real conversations, the kind that might feel uncomfortable at first, but could bring you closer than ever. And we'll explore how to rebuild trust, heal old wounds, and find that sweet spot where love flows freely without draining your savings dry. So stay with me, because the journey we're on, it's not just about money. It's about rewriting the story of what it means to be a grandparent in this chapter of life, on your terms, with your heart fully intact. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the fear that keeps so many of us lying awake at night. What if they stop loving me? It's a haunting question, isn't it? After all, family is everything. The thought of a strained relationship, a silent phone, or a holiday table with an empty chair, it can make even the strongest among us waver. But here's what I've come to realize. Love that depends on your wallet isn't love at all. It's a transaction. And you deserve so much more than that. Take Martha, a 75-year-old grandmother from Texas. Martha's grandson, Tyler, asked her to borrow $5,000 for a wedding ring. When she gently refused, he didn't speak to her for months. It felt like I'd lost him forever, she told me. But then, one afternoon, Tyler showed up at her door. No ring on his finger, but a humility in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "Grandma," he said, "I'm sorry. I was embarrassed to admit I couldn't afford it yet, but I want to do this right for her and for me." Today, Tyler's engaged to the same wonderful woman, and he's paying for that ring himself, one paycheck at a time. And Martha, she's not just his grandma anymore. She's the person he calls when life gets real, because he knows she'll tell him the truth, even when it's hard. Here's the truth we often miss. Boundaries don't push people away. They build deeper respect. When you say no to being an ATM, you're saying yes to being a person with limits, with needs, and with a love that's too big to be measured in dollars. Now, let's address the myth that's been sold to us for too long. If you love them, you'd give them everything. No. Love isn't about emptying your pockets. It's about filling their lives with memories, with wisdom, with the kind of support that doesn't come with a receipt. Think about it. What do you remember most about your own grandparents? The money they gave you? Or the time they spent with you? The stories they told? The way they made you feel safe? That's the legacy that lasts. Consider my Uncle Joe. Joe worked in a steel mill for 40 years, saved every penny, and left his kids a modest inheritance when he passed. But at his funeral, nobody talked about the money. They talked about how he taught his grandson to fish at dawn on Lake Michigan, how he'd sneak candy into church for the great-grandkids, how he'd listen, really listen, when someone was hurting. Your financial help might be forgotten in a year, but the love you show, that echoes for generations. So if you take nothing else from our time together, let it be this. You are not defined by what you can provide. You are defined by who you are, and who you are is enough. Now, I won't pretend this is easy. There will be moments when doubt creeps in, when you second-guess yourself, when the guilt feels heavier than a sack of bricks. But here's what I want you to do. Picture yourself sitting on a park bench, watching your grandkids play. They're laughing, running, soaking up the sun. And you're there, not worrying about bills or loans or strained conversations. Just present, at peace. That's what we're fighting for. Not just financial security, but the freedom to enjoy the life you've built, the whole life. Not just the parts you've set aside for others. In the next part, we'll dive into the quiet power of letting go. We'll explore how to release the weight of expectation, yours and theirs, and rediscover the simple joys that make this chapter of life so sacred. You'll hear stories of folks, just like you, who found freedom on the other side of no, and learned to love their role as grandparents in a whole new way. So stay close, because the most beautiful part of this journey isn't just protecting what you have, it's reclaiming who you've always been. Let's talk about something we rarely acknowledge out loud, the loneliness of being the strong one. For years, maybe decades, you've been the glue, the problem solver, the one who held it all together. But who holds you when the weight of that role starts to crack? When the people you've always cared for see you less as a person and more as a safety net. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about reclaiming something far more fragile and far more precious. Your sense of self. Let me share a story about my friend Eleanor. Eleanor's 78, a retired nurse from Boston. After her husband passed, her children began treating her like a backup plan. Need a loan? Call mom. Can't afford summer camp? Grandma's got it. But when Eleanor's arthritis flared up, and she asked her daughter to drive her to physical therapy. Sorry, Mom, I'm swamped at work. One night, Eleanor sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at a pile of unpaid requests, and realized, I've become a convenience, not a mother. So she did something radical. She wrote her kids a letter. Not an angry one, a loving one. She told them how it felt to be reduced to a checkbook. How she missed being asked about her life, not just her savings. The response? Silence at first. Then slowly apologies. Visits that weren't about money. Grandkids drawing her pictures instead of circling toys in catalogs. And Eleanor. She finally started painting again. Something she'd given up 30 years ago. Last month, she sold her first landscape. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is remind them you're still here, not just your wallet. Here's what Eleanor taught me. You don't owe anyone an apology for existing beyond their needs. Your hobbies, your dreams, your quiet afternoons with a book. These aren't luxuries. They're proof that you're still alive, still growing, still more than a stepping stone in someone else's story. Now, let's tackle a question I've been sitting with. What does it mean to leave a legacy? We're often told it's about money, trust funds, inheritances, heirlooms. But what if the real legacy is the way you live these years right now? The way you laugh, the way you say no with love, the way you show your family that aging isn't about fading away. It's about rising into a new kind of power. Think about Henry, an 82-year-old retired firefighter from Chicago. Henry used to worry he'd be remembered only for the money he left behind. Then his grandson asked him to teach a safety workshop at the local school. No pay. Just Henry standing in front of a classroom again, telling stories, demonstrating fire drills, letting kids try on his old helmet. Best day of my life since retirement, he told me. And now, those kids wave at him at the grocery store. Their parents thank him for changing how my son thinks about bravery. Henry's legacy isn't in his will. It's in the lives he's still shaping, long after his last paycheck. Your value doesn't decrease with age. It deepens. And the people who matter will never measure you in dollars. They'll measure you in the courage you showed them by living your life, not just funding theirs. Let's address the quiet fear. Let me tell you about a man named Walter. Walter's 83, a retired mail carrier from Kansas. For years, he said yes to every request. Loans for cars, bailouts for bad decisions, even footing the bill for family vacations he couldn't afford. I wanted to be the hero, he told me. But one day, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. All I saw was a wallet with wrinkles. Then, Walter's sister sent him a box of old photos. There he was at 22, grinning in his postal uniform. At 40, teaching his daughter to ride a bike. At 65, laughing with his wife under a backyard cherry tree. I realized, he said, I'd spent so much time being needed, I'd forgotten how to be loved. So Walter did something radical. He called a family meeting. No accusations, no guilt, just honesty. I can't keep giving money, he said, but I can give you my time, my stories, and the love I've got left in this old heart. At first, they didn't understand, but slowly something shifted. His grandson started joining him for Saturday morning pancakes, just to talk. His niece asked him to walk her down the aisle when her father couldn't. And last Christmas, they pooled their money to send him on a fishing trip he'd dreamed about for decades. Walter's eyes welled up when he told me. Turns out, I wasn't the hero because of what I gave them. I was the hero because of who I was to them. And that, my friends, is the grand truth we've been walking toward. You are not loved for what you provide. You are loved for who you are. All those years of sacrifice, of showing up, of teaching and guiding and holding tight when life got stormy. That's your legacy. Not the dollars lent or the bills paid, but the way you made people feel. The safety of your arms. The wisdom in your stories. The quiet strength of your presence. So let's rewrite the script, shall we? Let's stop measuring our worth in interest rates and IOUs. Let's start measuring it in Sunday phone calls, in grandkids' laughter, in the peace of knowing you've honored yourself as fiercely as you've honored others. Because here's the secret no one tells you about growing older. This chapter isn't about winding down. It's about rising up. Rising into the freedom of being enough. Exactly as you are. Exactly as you've always been.